Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Yeshiva League Pass Hockey Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Cass, and I would like to let you know first who we're sponsored by, and that is the Weiselberg Law Firm. For nearly 20 years, you've entrusted Elliot with the growth and guidance of your kids, and now it's time to let him do the same for your family's most important asset, your home. Admitted in both New York and New Jersey, Elliot can help guide you through any residential or commercial purchase, sale, refinance, or lease, and he'll do it with championship quality and award-winning care. If you're looking for your commercial coach or a new home is your goal, please reach out to the Weiselberg Law Real Estate Services today. You can call 917-952-2597 or send them an email to wiselawesque@gmail.com. And I'd like to remind everyone once again, that's the Weiselberg Law Firm. Please choose wisely. And it's that time of year, time for the championship games. And I know there's been a lot of time that's passed since the last episode we put out, but it was for very good reason. And with the championship games right around the corner, no better opportunity to spring back into action. And so, with that being said, let's get right into it. So, we're going to start with JV, and this is going to be one big episode. It's going to be both the previews for JV and varsity in one episode. Just want to get that out of the way in advance. So, we'll start with JV. And first, let's talk a little bit about what happened in the playoffs as well as the format. So again, to review, we had 8 teams in the JV League, 4 teams in the Eastern Conference, 4 teams in the Western Conference. The way it worked was that each division winner won each division winner made the playoffs. And after that, there were 2 wild cards. So it was possible that you could have 3 teams from one division in the playoffs, and or that you could have 2 and 2 still. But one way or another, it would guarantee that one entire division would not make the playoffs, even if that were to work out numerically. Now, with that being said, the 4 teams we had in the playoffs, and it was a 3-1 configuration in terms of the way it laid out. DRS won the Eastern Conference. They went 8-2, and they were the only team to make it in from the East. And the Frisch Cougars won the Western Conference. They went 9-1, and they were the one in the West. And then after that, the 2 wildcards in order were SAR and TABC. So the order of seeding, it was 1 through 4 straight bracket. The 1 played the 4, the 2 played the 3. It was straight to a semifinal game. The winners emerged and are playing each other in the championship. So we have Frisch, who took on TABC because TABC was the 4 and Frisch was the 1, the higher seeds hosted. And we have DRS, who took on SAR. And DRS beat SAR 1-0 in the JV semifinals at DRS. And TABC pulled off the upset in Frisch and beat Frisch 4-1 at Frisch. So our championship final is TABC against DRS. A pretty classic matchup in terms of the teams. We've seen them there for, if you include this year, what will now be 3 of the last 4 consecutive JV championship games, which is crazy. And it's a huge compliment to both of these schools putting out, very strong teams year after year and with different players. I think it just really shows the programs both of those schools have in place. And with that being said, straight to the matchup, we'll get right to it. So first of all, we have the higher seed DRS. DRS during the regular season went 8-2, as I mentioned. They're coached by new coaches. Remember, Larry Gross decided to let go of the reins. He is no longer coaching at DRS. So the torch was passed on to 2 of his former players in Hillel Golubchik and Rafal Gamal. Both of them YCQ players who played in championships there, as well as outstanding DRS players. They both had deep runs in the playoffs throughout their time. And with that being said, they've done a great job so far. They have started their DRS coaching careers off to a very strong start, and they've really sent a strong message to this JV team, which, yes, is in the championship, but is not necessarily as talented as the last 3 teams they've had. And they've really gotten their guys to buy into the system that they want to run, which might be a little bit different than the system that their guys were used to running under Larry from last year and years prior. And they've gotten their guys to buy in and to play hard. to get that system down, and they find different ways to win. I think that is the thing that really separates this DRS team from other DRS teams we've seen in the past is we know they're going to be strong defensively, and we know they're going to hustle their butts off for the entirety of the game, and they're never going to show quit. They're always going to show fight. But they don't really have a superstar on their team that's going to score 10 goals a game for them, or that's going to play lockdown defense for the entirety of the game while bringing it offensively as well. They have guys that can contribute on both sides, but I wouldn't say that this team has a true game breaker that is looked at and said, wow, this is the one player or the few players, let's say, we need to focus our game around in order to ensure DRS cannot succeed because they are a bunch of players that just play hard. That is DRS's story for this year. And not to say they don't have players not to say they have players that don't play hard ever. All of their players play hard. It's just a different feel to this team. If you look at last year's team, they had a Josh Lampert, a Zevi Fuchs, and Ami Marks they could lean on for skill and big play opportunities. And the year before that, they had guys like Micha Khan and rather last year's varsity team, you're looking at guys like Ellis Bornstein and Micha Khan and Nathaniel Lawrence, and Yitzi Uding, guys who will just go out there and make plays, who also do play very hard. But there was more of an identity of those players I just mentioned as also skill players that you had to worry about for other reasons than just playing hard. And here, you've got your contributors, obviously, on this DRS team. We'll get into them very briefly. But again, it's this identity that they play with that is not a super skilled identity. They just make simple plays and they work hard. Their game is very simplified. And a couple of those names that we're going to be looking at to be factors in this game for DRS. You could be looking at a guy like Eitan Rogoff, a guy like Ozzy Herskowitz, a guy like Ethan Lieber, a guy like Evan Feldman, or a guy like Sam Goldstoff. All of these guys played huge roles for DRS all season long. And I know they're a deep team and I'm leaving names off the board. It's just the guys who have been really more at the top of the list for them, doing it more often than others. And that's what you're getting in your offense and in your defense. You're going to see Ethan Lieber going both ways and Evan Feldman going both ways. Sam Goldstoff has been a brick house with a lethal shot all season long. And specifically in the TABC game, DRS faced TABC earlier on in the year in TABC. They won that game 4-1. Now, with that being said, and I mentioned this was about Sam Goldstoff, he had a hat trick in that game, and he's a defenseman. It wasn't him running the floor, going through everyone, coast to coast or end to end, making skill plays left and right. The three goals that separated DRS from TABC were three clean faceoffs, one back to the point that Goldstoff managed to score on. So if we're looking at the overall game, which I'll get to later, it wasn't a DRS dominating TABC and, sucking the life out of them going up 3 goals when that happened. It was a very quick, face off win ambush, face off win ambush, same thing over and over again. And that's how they managed to build their lead. And when we're looking at that, so that's, we talk about Sam Goldstoff, obviously, he's been very good defensively and he's got that shot. He's a guy that has always possessed that shot. Last year, he scored a big goal in the semifinals to tie the game against Hafter on the JV level, which sent the game to overtime, and then eventually DRS wins it. Another player who scored 2 goals in that game for DRS is on this year's team as well, and that's Eitan Rogoff, who has been very good this year. A lot of people did not think that he would be as much of a factor with everything else other than the fact that he's a very tall and lengthy player. And I think a lot of people made the mistake of doing that because last year, that's what he brought as a 9th grader. People thought that other players would catch up to him physically and that it would sort of regress a little bit. Well, it's been the exact opposite. And it's not to say players haven't caught up with him, but it's rather he's decided to work for the better himself that, he's more than a guy who's just tall and lengthy now. He's very patient with the ball and he looks for shots. And he's a very simple player. He makes the simple play. He doesn't look to overplay or, go too far into a play. He's not a risky player. He's a fundamentals first guy. That's the thing with this DRS team. Most of them are, but especially you're looking at guys who look at it who are going to be impactful, and that's Sam Goldstoff and Eitan Rogov, probably their best defenseman and arguably their best offenseman right there. Other guys that you're going to be looking at in this game who are going to play factors for DRS. Obviously, I mentioned Ozzy Herskowitz, who's going to be a very strong forward, who's been a huge forechecker for them, who's also got a good shot. You don't want to let him get set up in the O zone. He's played a lot with Rogoff this year. Ethan Lieber's gone both ways. Evan Feldman's gone both ways. They have guys that are versatile and that can chip in every here and there. And it all goes back to that first point that I mentioned. They play with an identity, which is that they all play hard. There's not one particular player you look at this team and say he's a game breaker, we shut him down, we win this game. You got to focus the same way on everyone, and that's what makes this DRS team so challenging to play against. And then, of course, you've got the goaltending, which I've yet to mention, and that's Max Isaacs, who, if you asked me coming into the year who would be the best goaltender in the JV league coming in, my answer would have been Max Isaacs, and he has done nothing except prove me right. He's been absolutely spectacular. In big games, he has showed up both in the playoffs. I mean, he had the shutout 1-0 in the semifinals against SAR, and he's been rock solid all year long. All the way from the opening night game they had against the Hafter Hawks, all the way to, through the middle of the season against TABC. His real blemish, his real only blemish, was the game against Frisch, where DRS got destroyed. It was like 8-1, I think. And that was already at a point where DRS had clinched the playoffs and won their division. So it was more than just clinch the playoffs, because you could have clinched the playoffs and not won your division. DRS won their division, and there was nothing left really for them to play for other than potentially the 1 seed. I don't remember if Frisch had already locked it up. I don't think that DRS had an opportunity to win it because Frisch was undefeated. No, actually they did, because Frisch was 9-1 on the regular season. So they were 8-1 going into that game, and DRS was also 8-1 going into that game. So the winner, that was really the only blemish. You look at it and you say, okay, Max Isaacs, what happened here? And when you're looking at it, it's not entirely his fault. It just seems like DRS gave up one early, and it sort of snowballed from there and created the avalanche. And by that point, they had dug themselves into a hole and couldn't really climb out of it. So sometimes that happens, and clearly he rebounded very well, because the very next game he plays, he throws a shutout in the semifinal game. It's never easy to throw a shutout on the board, but especially in a big playoff game. Their last home game of the regular season didn't matter if they won or lost. That is a huge compliment to him, as well as the DRS defense. And when you're looking, again, more than just the fact they play hard and they're solid really in every area, this is a team that really, really is trying to prove that even though they aren't that super talented, skilled team all around, that you don't need that in order to win a championship. It's the work ethic that they show, which is going to, help them pull through. It's helped them pull through all season long. And the only team that really gave them fits during the regular season in Frisch is no longer in the playoffs, as I'll get to. They were knocked out by TABC. The last thing that I do want to say, though, is that if there's an area you look at of this DRS team and say, what might be their downfall or what may be a question mark for them, it would have to be their coaching. And I said earlier that Hilla Golubchik and Rafal Gamal have done an excellent job. I'm not saying that all of a sudden they're not going to in this championship game. What I'm saying is that even though they had experience as players, that they're still sort of feeling it out and learning on the fly as coaches. And this is their first time with this group of players, and it's their first time ever coaching in a championship game. And that is not always an easy task. Doesn't matter the team they have, you're still going to have to make adjustments. It's the championship game. You know, one missed opportunity there or one misread option or opportunity for DRS could end up being an advantage for TABC. I'll throw it back to the varsity championship from 2 years ago, where we had Yakalisker from Frisch going up against Jacob Schwartzman from SAR. And Jacob Schwartzman had done an excellent job. He broke down his SAR team in the middle of the year to get them through a slow start and got them playing as the hottest team going into the playoffs. He goes down 3-0 in the championship against Yakinol, and, he breaks, he decides to break up his lines. He changes things around, and ends up pulling off an incredible comeback from down 3-0 in the first period to win the championship in overtime. And, a lot of people, so we've seen that's the way maybe it could work as an advantage because the experienced coaching staff for TABC that I'll get to in a few minutes, you know, they are the ones with experience here as opposed to the ones in Gamal and Golubchik from DRS. But that could also work, or how I would assume, DRS wants to counter is saying, okay, well, you don't know what we're capable of and you don't know what we're going to do. So you have to sort of feel it out too. But it is just going to be the point that I'm saying being that DRS as coaches have never been here before as coaches. And, it might pose some challenges. But anyway, that is what we have from DRS, and it certainly looks as if this game is going to be interesting just because of the fact that it's a rematch that we've seen a couple times already, and it's a rematch of a game that took place earlier this year. And now let's go to the lower seed, the away team that would technically be in this game, and that's TABC. TABC during the regular season did not have a very strong season. It's not the team that went 10-0 3 years ago and 2 years ago on the JV level that made it to the championship against a DRS team that had a similar regular season performance. It's a TABC team that has experimented with a couple of different things throughout the year, and they've also faced a little bit of adversity. The main thing to know is that they do deserve to be here. They've earned their way here. They have been playing well and they've gotten hot at the right time. That's something that I've always said, and I'm sure I've said it before on this podcast. It's not always necessarily the team that has the best season in the regular season or that has the best team that wins the championship. And you see it in pro sports too. It could be the team that ends up being the hottest at the right time. And so you have this TABC Storm team on the JV level, still coached by Cvika Paleoff and Yosef Rabin. So they're not unfamiliar. As I mentioned when I was talking about the coaches on DRS compared to the coaches of TABC, they're not unfamiliar to this territory. They've been to at least 2 or 3 championships already. Technically, it's 3, but in 2020, the season got postponed. So I'm not going to count that they didn't play the game. But if you did count it, this would be their 4th as head coaches because before that, they were both under Norm Blumenthal before he decided to call it a career at TABC. And when you're looking at that, again, they've got the experience in championships already. Now, do they have a winning record? I mean, they don't have a losing record either. They're 1-1 in championship games coached, but they did lose to DRS earlier in this year. And that's something I believe might actually benefit them because these guys are guys that know how to make adjustments. They've been able to do it their entire coaching career so far, although it's not very long as head coaches. It's only been about 3 or 4 years, but you're looking at them and you're saying, okay, we know what we can expect from them if you're DRS. And you know that they've gotten this TABC team to the championship. You know what they say, you just got to get in to win. That's the playoffs going to the championship as a whole, but especially you get to the championship. Once you're there, you never know what could happen. And, what I was saying about TABC not being like a classic TABC team that's been dominant all throughout the regular season is because they went 5-4-1 on the regular season. Now, you might be wondering, is this even a competition? DRS is 8-2. They beat TABC 4-1 already, and TABC's 5-4-1. Explain this, And the way it checks out is as follows. TABC in their first 5 games started 1-3-1. They lost their first game of the regular season. They won their second. And then their next 3 games, they lost 2 of them and they tied a game. In their last 5 games of the regular season, and keep in mind, that put them in some playoff jeopardy, for them to potentially miss the postseason. But in their last 5 games, against a lot of the same teams they have already played, they went 4-1. And they enter the championship game on a 3-game win streak. If you include the semis, they won their second last game of the year against SAR, which really put them in a good spot. And then they beat Rambam in their last game of the year to officially clinch the playoffs. They get Frisch in the semis at Frisch, a team that has beaten them twice, the only team that played them twice and beat them twice. And TABC ends up with a 4-1 upset. They were up 4-0 in that game. Frisch got a late goal. By that point, it was too early. Excuse me, it was too late. And really, I mean, TABC, they took control of it early. They scored a couple seconds into the game, and it snowballed from there. And sometimes there's just nothing you could do. You need a bounce that you don't get if you're Frisch in that case. And, before you can get one back, TABC's got four on the board. And it's just an unfortunate situation. We have seen it in the past, but that's just the way the game goes sometimes. And as I was saying, they win four of their last five. They get hot at the right time. They're in the playoffs now. And now this is a new TABC team DRS has not yet to see, both figuratively and literally. And the reason I say that is because obviously, I said it before, TABC, that 4-1 loss they had to DRS, the difference is three clean faceoffs, one back to the point where you got the one guy for DRS who's going to snipe it, and that's Sam Goldstaff from the point. And he's got the hat trick. They win 4-1. But TABC played well in that game. I was there to witness it. They played very well in the game. They generated chances. Max Isaacs was fantastic for DRS. Saul Sandell was solid for TABC. You're looking at a couple point shots with some screens in front, power play also on a couple of them. And sometimes it just gets by you. Great shot from a great player, even on a great goalie, it can happen. And that's what really, I think, sets this game up, is also where it's going to be played, because it's not going to be played in either TABC or DRS. It's actually going to be played in HAFTR. And that might favor TABC a little bit more, just because that size of a gym is closer to the one they play in instead of the one DRS is in. But DRS has ways they could take advantage. You could let their defenseman, you don't want to let their defenseman take shots if you're TABC from anywhere, because any shot is a good shot in that gym. But when you're looking at it, you say there are ways to capitalize on this, even though it's a smaller gym if you're DRS. And with that being said, also to get back into the TABC side of things, you want to talk about some players to watch on their side as well, because I already mentioned the few on DRS's side, but on TABC, you're looking at guys like Jake Rubenstein, David Ratzersdorfer, Jack Solomon, David Kranzler, David Allen, Adine Katler, a big name that I'll get to in a second, as well as their goalie Saul Sandell, who has been right there with Max Isaacs. I would rank him a little bit below just because of the start of the season he had, but he has been locked down when he's needed to be, especially trying to push for the playoffs. And even in the playoffs, I mean, you give up one to a team that has outscored TABC, if I'm not mistaken, like 5-1 or 6-1 on the regular season. So, that's huge. And he was incredible in the semifinal game against Frisch. And really the only difference between him and Max Isaacs in the playoffs right now, and quite literally, it's a 1-goal differential. Isaacs with the shutout and Sandell giving up the one. So that is something you look at if you're TABC as well. And as I mentioned with Adine Katler, so both figuratively and literally, it's a different TABC team mentally. They're more composed. That DRS game was the last or the second last of their first five games that they lost. Or not the first five games, but their first five games of the regular season, and they had lost three of them. And then they go 4-1 to close out the season. And a big player they got back, and really when I say back, a big player they got because he never started with them, was Adine Katler. Adine Katler played his ninth grade year at SAR, won the championship on the JV level last year. He transferred to TABC over the summer, and he injured himself. And it wasn't like okay, he can play to start, but we'll see, we'll limit his time. No, he injured himself, and it was bad enough that he was supposed to make a return around the middle of the season. I want to say like late December-ish, maybe early January. And he was telling me he was going to give himself, a couple weeks to be able to get back into it from the conditioning aspect and, the physicality aspect, and that he'd be ready to go for the final stretch. Well, when he went back to get reevaluated, there was a setback and he actually had to wait it out even longer. So he missed the entire regular season for the TABC Storm. Or maybe it's possible he played in the last game against Rambam, but I don't remember. And obviously, and with all due respect to Rambam, he would have, he would have been a non-factor, and if he played, he was a non-factor because that is a pretty substantial margin in terms of the goals that separated them. And with that being said, now he comes back in the playoffs, and it was interesting to hear because sometimes when you have players that can benefit from moving up to varsity or, staying on JV, I know because I've seen this, I've done this myself as well as a coach in years past. Mo Fuchs and I had an interesting conversation. He said if TABC gets eliminated in JV, maybe he thinks about moving a player like Cattler up to varsity because next year he's going to play varsity. And if he thinks he can benefit and help develop him more for the varsity stage, maybe that's something he does. And if they don't, if they're not eliminated in JV by the time, the deadline comes around, which I believe is New Year's Day, or maybe it's New Year's Eve. I'm not sure. I know it's one of the two. Um, if TABC is still alive, he keeps him in JV. They go to the playoffs, and the longer they ride it out, the better the opportunity and the chance that Cattler has to come back and play on the JV level and make the impact. So with that being said, they were in the playoff race. They weren't eliminated. He stays on JV. He joins the team for the semis. He scores a goal less than 30 seconds in. And I can't think of a bigger statement than that if you're TABC and if you're Dean Cattler specifically. So huge, huge boost and gain for the TABC Storm. He was not in that DRS game that they played in earlier. And if Dean Cattler is healthy, even if he's, say, 75% right now instead of 100% of what he normally would be, that's still, at the very worst, is a top 10 player in this league. If he's fully healthy, I would say he's top five, maybe even top three. He is a superstar when he's going. And if he's going to be going full on for this TABC game, it's going to be a challenge for DRS. They have not seen him this season. They only saw him twice last year, and that was with a completely different looking SAR team, which had superstars all throughout the lineup. So it's a very different look this year if they get him. And he's a versatile player. He can play offense, he can play defense, both at high levels. Power play guy, penalty kill guy, first minute of the period, last minute of the period. He's good in any role. My question is, what level of health are we going to see him at? Is he 100%? Is he 50%? Is he somewhere more in the middle at 75%? We'll see. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens with this TABC versus DRS championship matchup on the JV level. And with that being said, I know a lot of you guys are asking me for a prediction. I'm not going to give you an exact score on this. And as a matter of fact, I'm not even going to give you the team that wins. I will say, though, I believe if there's any way this game is going to be separated between these two teams in terms of a score, it's going to be a one-goal game. I don't know if it's going to be TABC or DRS winning, obviously. DRS has been they've recovered well from that Frisch loss at the end of the season. Max Isaacs has been outstanding for them. And their players, again, I've said it 5 times probably, if not more. They just are all workhorses. They all play their hearts out, and they're all willing to do it for the next guy for the guy who stands next to them or sits next to them on the bench, in the locker room, everywhere. And this TABC team is just as deep with players who, are right there with DRS. Maybe they're a little bit more skilled than DRS. Do they have the same, full throttle, grind it, pound it down your throat style that DRS has? Not always, but it depends on the players you're looking at. Similar to DRS, they've got great goaltending. Obviously, their coaching staff has done a good job to get them here as well, and their experience. So you could look at it either way. Now you factor in the gym. It's more similar to TABC than to DRS. There are ways that DRS can take advantage of it. There are ways that TABC can take advantage of it, and disadvantages they could put their opponents at as a result of whatever they try to gain in terms of an advantage. So it's going to be interesting. I believe it's going to be a one-goal game. And the difference in this game is going to be the goaltending. I would point to that being the X factor. It's not necessarily the return of Cattler or a new look TABC team or a potentially better coach TABC team. We don't really know which coaching staff is better yet because of the fact that they're two different styles that we saw TABC play. They were a different team when they played DRS the first time, even though they still played pretty well. And this is a different TABC team we're seeing now this time around with, a couple new players, or not new players, but players that just didn't get the opportunity to play, or a player who was a big piece for this TABC team that didn't get the opportunity to play earlier. So it's going to be interesting to see. I'm not going to say anything more than that. I think it's going to be a one-goal game. May the best team win. It's going to be an absolute thriller. And for all of you guys, the game starts at 11:45, or I believe pregame festivities start at 11:45. So the roster announcements and the national anthems, probably a few Prakim of Tehillim will be said as well as anything else, between both teams and the commissioner, Seth Gordon. And with that being said, it's going to be a great game. But at 11:45, you do need a ticket to get in. If you can't get in because you don't go to either school, I think those are the only ways you get tickets. Check out the live stream. It should be posted on moahsal.com. I'll be on the call along with Jacob Schwartzman, and it's going to be an incredible, incredible game. Cannot wait. Already looking forward to it. It's just a couple days away. The time of recording this, it is Thursday afternoon of March 6th. The game takes place on March 9th. With that being said, we are going to move on to varsity. And this is the topic I'm sure you all wanted to hear about. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So in the JV championship, I mentioned we have TABC and DRS. In the varsity championship, that was the matchup everyone, or that at least most people, the overwhelming majority of people, I would say safely, expected that to be the championship matchup on the varsity level. Well, surprise, surprise, it's not. The varsity matchup will feature DRS, but will not feature TABC. The team that was probably put as second to make it other than TABC or DRS would have been SAR. They are not in it as well. We have the Hank Hurricanes in the varsity championship against the DRS Wildcats. Yes, you heard me correctly. The Hank Hurricanes in the varsity championship in a year that featured the TABC team we have and the SAR team we have, the Frisch team, and other teams all around. It's this Hank team. And not to take anything away from them, this Hank team was not on the radar of many individuals coming in. And the main reason why I believe that's the case is because they didn't have a JV team 2 years ago. So we didn't really know exactly what they would be. But what I can tell you is they are certainly deserving of being here, especially with what has happened during their season and throughout the playoffs so far. There is no doubt in my mind about that. They have earned this and they deserve this to be here in the championship game against DRS right now. We're going to start with the favorite, though, and that is DRS. And here's a fun fact. This will be the first championship ever that will feature two teams from the East where it is not DRS and Hafter specifically. Other than that, DRS has made it to a championship. Hafter's made it to a championship in the same year against each other, but never anyone else from the same Eastern Conference. So it'll be the first time that we have two teams from the East and that it will be DRS against a different team other than Hafter, and that is Hank this year. So we'll start with DRS. I mentioned Larry Gross. He's not only not coaching JV, he's not coaching varsity either. I've seen him around at the games, but he's not coaching. So DRS is now coached by Andrew Giller and Yair Sturm. First-time head coaches. Sturm has stuck around the program, not exactly coaching, but he's been around, knows the system. He was a player himself. And Andrew Giller has been an assistant coach at DRS for the last bunch of years. I think since he graduated high school that he stepped in there, at least once he was back in the area. So you're looking at that, a guy who's familiar with a lot of these players. He's been with all of them. The seniors when they were freshmen, he was an assistant coach then, the assistant coach, throughout the next 2 years. This is in the fourth year of the guys being there as seniors. They are, they're still being coached by Andrew Giller, but he is the head coach this year. So just want to clarify that. And for DRS, it was a pretty expected season from them in terms of what they did. They went 13-1 on the regular season. The only loss they had was against TABC in TABC, which is exactly the way it shook out 2 years ago on the JV level. And you look at what they've done this year, they have beat, the top competition. They've beaten Frisch and they haven't beaten TABC, but TABC's out now, so that's a non-factor for them. They've beaten Hank. They beat Hank twice. They beat them in one of the first games of the year for both teams, and then they beat Hank, but that game went to overtime as well. So let that be a sign. This can and very likely will be a very good game. Hank is not just here to be punched around because they are the lower seed, so to speak, and everyone expected it to be TABC DRS with DRS being the lower seed. It's not going to be the case. I very, very, very much do not believe it will not be a case of DRS just running circles around Hank. I really don't. But to continue with what else DRS was able to do this year, you look at the game so other than the TABC game, which they still played pretty well and despite losing, the two wins against Hank, the win against Frisch, two wins against Hafter, they have been a team that it has gotten better as the season has gradually progressed. And when you look at it, this team is coming off a championship win. Last year, they won the championship on the varsity level, and a lot of the guys from last year's team who made impacts on the junior level of things rather than the senior level of things really are, they're still around and they're still making impacts. And most notably, you're going to be looking at guys like Moshe Aryeh and Jack Greenbaum, who have been a force again this year. Yitzi Uden and Max Pokris, who have also been a force on offense. On defense, you're looking at Micha Khan, Isaac Spector, Ellis Bornstein. You know, they're going to be the regulars you have in there. And then there are some new players. Oh, and I also want to mention Josh Papilski in net, who's been great. He's gotten much, much better as the season has gone along. And especially in the playoffs, he has played his heart out in the playoffs. Then you're going to also get some of the guys who didn't necessarily see such big minutes 2 years ago or last year at all. Well, depends on what grade they were in, because you do have a good mix of 11th and 12th graders this year. But you're looking at guys from last year's JV team making impacts this year, like Josh Lampert, who didn't get a lot of time as a ninth grader, and Zevi Fuchs, who didn't get any time as a ninth grader. Zevi Fuchs has been on the starting D pair with Micha Khan for most of, if not this entire season. Huge, huge, huge development being taken care of there. And everyone knows he's a superstar in terms of his own age. But to do it against the guys a year older than him, he has really, really accepted the challenge and really just executed almost perfectly, with the exception of one play here, one play there. And then you're also looking at a guy like Ami Marks, who another one of the big three from last year's JV championship caliber team DRS had with Lampert, Marks, and Fuchs. And Lampert is doing it on offense this year. Fuchs is playing defense, and Marks is going both ways. We've seen him play on the power play a little bit. We've seen him play on the penalty kill a little bit, play defense at times, play offense at times. He gives you the best of both worlds. And that is something I think that has helped this DRS team be a bit better than they were 2 years ago on the JV level. It's even though the guys are a bit more known this year, they're actually making contributions where they were better known freshmen when they were freshmen, those three players, but they didn't get the opportunity or just didn't make impacts at all when given the opportunity, or weren't impactful enough to stay in the lineup. Now they have, and it's been big for them. And that is something I think that's going to play a big role in this game for DRS. There are guys who have been with this team before, but also now you go back to what they did last year and they have championship experience. And that is going to factor in, as well as all of the development and growth they've had this year as players as well. And even though they're great players, there's always room for improvement. So, with that being said, that has been something that really helps them. And, something that also plays into this now is where this game is going to be played, and that's at North Shore. It's going to be a doubleheader, but it's not going to be played in the same place. And DRS plays in a gym more similar to North Shore than Hank does. So that's another thing you look for. DRS is a team built on speed and vision, and they really just, again, there are superstars on this team, but a lot of their guys, it comes from that work ethic that I've mentioned. That has always been the common denominator with DRS, is they always are going to work their butts off and they're going to show you they want it until that buzzer sounds. And if they don't get it, then they come back strong the next time. This is a championship game, so it's obviously going to be a little different. It's the seniors last year ever playing in high school. That's part of what happens, every year. And with that being said, this is a very loaded, deep DRS team. It's not just a team that has a line or two of players and they're all very, very good, and that's what makes them dangerous. They are loaded up and down the lineup, and it's a challenge. It's definitely going to be a challenge. There is a reason why only one team has beaten this team this year, and why they're undefeated at home, even though this game isn't going to be played at DRS. They were undefeated at home. They had to work for a couple of those games, and it includes the playoffs as well, where they beat Kushner in the first round and SAR in the second round. Both were great games, but they've had a challenge. They've really had a challenge in front of them at home, and they've been able to take care of it, and they're well prepared coming into this game. So that is what we have for DRS. Hank now. This is, and I wanted to start with this, but I'll get to it. The obvious belief, I think here, at least, is that this is a clear case of David versus Goliath, where you have DRS as the clear favorite, the heavy favorite in this matchup, and Hank, who, based on what we've seen in years past, is just kind of here. And now they get this opportunity. And let me tell you, I told you that even though, yeah, it's like people expected TABC here, and if not TABC, it would have been SAR. It's not the case with this Hank team because they are deserving of being here. And they have players that have really pulled the reins for them and have dragged themselves through it, through thick and thin, and they have not backed down from any challenge. And I think that's the way it's still going to be. So with this Hank team, you're looking at a team, first of all, they're coached by Rabbi Harris. He won the Beitler Award last year, and he has done a good job, a very good job with this team. He's had a lot of these guys since they were middle schoolers in sixth grade, and if not, maybe even younger. I think maybe even fourth or fifth grade for some of them. And he's ran through with them all the way through high school. So he knows this class of Hank players better than anyone, with the exception of maybe an addition of a player who transferred here or transferred there or came to Hank for high school who wasn't there. The majority of his team is homegrown, which is a very, very big accomplishment and something you can almost never say for any other school. Maybe the exception of, Hafter back in the day with Rabbi David Beitler coaching there. So huge, huge props to him for being able to put this together and to get them where they are now. In terms of Hank's overall season, Hank on the regular season was not as good as 13-1, but they were still rock solid. They went 9-4-0-1. And they tied a game, excuse me, they lost a game in overtime to DRS, and they lost a game in regulation to DRS. But some key wins of theirs. You're looking at 2 wins against Hafter, including the one that was on the last day of the regular season. They came back from 3-0 down in the first period to win in overtime. I believe the final score was 6-5 or 7-6. After the first period, it went back and forth, and Hank comes back to win the game, which not only got them another win on their record, but it actually clinched the 2 seed for them, which gave them a bye straight to the quarterfinals. And that was huge for them because they didn't need to play an extra game. It also shook up who they would potentially be playing. So they get the 2 seed on the last day of the regular season, and they end up getting Frisch in the first round. They beat Frisch. Then they've got to go on the road to TABC, and everyone, including myself, is thinking this is about as uphill a climb as you're ever going to have to make. Because Hank already went into DRS, and although they lost, they took a point from DRS. Hank lost to TABC also during the regular season in Hank. So everyone was thinking, okay, if they go into Hank and beat them there, they should, be the heavy favorites even more in TABC. Well, Hank took advantage of the terrain. TABC's gym is the most similar to Hank in terms of its configuration and its layout, really with the exception of the length. The width is pretty similar. And in terms of the way the walls play out, one side is all wall, or the boards, I should say. One side is all wall, similar, just like Hank. One side is all bench and boards, just like Hank. And then on one side of TABC, you've got the all wall again. That's on the wall closer to the away team's bench. And on the other side, you have what they call the Pikachu pit, where there are boards on the bottom, but if you shoot the ball out high enough, it can go out of play. And that's the same thing in Hank. One side closer to the away bench, it's all wall. And the side that's closer to the Hank bench, they have the stage there. So the ball can go out of play. So it's almost identical in terms of the layout, the configuration. The only exception is that the Hank gym is a little bit bigger because it's longer in distance. And maybe there's a little bit more space behind the net as well. But other than that, this is a Hank team. They're not very deep. I will say that. Like they have a lot of players, but they don't roll all of their players. They roll about anywhere from 7 to 8, maybe 9 guys from the field. And it starts up top with Elia Yitzhaki, who has been right up there as arguably the best player his age, period. This is his fourth year playing varsity. And well, not just his, but he has played every year on varsity, like gotten actual time. And he's been impactful every year on varsity. When he was a ninth grader, he was very impactful. When he was a 10th grader, he was very impactful. So you knew once he got to varsity age with him himself, he was going to be even more impactful. And he has been lights out. He's been a superstar ever since he's been a sixth grader, playing against guys 2, 3 years older than him. And he's always had this edge where he's a smaller guy compared to most in the league, but he never backs down. And you combine that with his speed, his elite skill. His stick handling, his hand-eye coordination is almost like nothing I've ever seen before. And his quick shot, his quickness in general, it's more than just his shot, but his movement and the way he reads plays, I would argue is not just for this year, but in general, probably the best I've ever seen. I played with his older brother Jonathan, who was a captain when I was a player in high school, and his older brother Daniel I got to watch for many years as well. And they were both outstanding players. But it seems like the younger you went in the It's Hockey family, somehow the more talented they got. And that's a huge compliment to all of them because they were all outstanding players, incredible players. You have Elia, who's on the verge of being the only one to win a championship in high school, though. And it could happen. He's got a chance to do it. So it starts up top with him. And he's complemented very well by another first line offenseman in Elon Kogel, who is kind of like Elia 2.0. He's an unpredictable player. You never know if he's going to pass, if he's going to shoot. His vision is incredible. His speed is something that is very underrated. A lot of people think it's all Elia. He's going to get in there, forecheck, make the play. He'll curl out himself. He'll pass it himself. Doesn't matter. You got to watch out for this guy. He has been very sneaky, unbelievable. And I know it's tough to say sneaky, unbelievable. This is the one exception. He has been outstanding all season for Hank. He took a huge step last year on the varsity level, in varsity age, but played up to everyone. And a lot of people weren't as high on him. This year, he has been the perfect complement for Elia on offense, and it's done wonders for both of them. They are very good together. They're not very big players, but they work so well down low. The way they use their bodies to control the ball, and they both play with an edge. They'll make skill plays, but they don't think the skill play first. It's very similar to what I said about DRS and JV, is they're just so fundamentally sound. These two players together, Elia Yitzhaki and Ilan Kogel, are very fundamentally sound with each other. And once they have a chance, when the space is open, that's when you see them wow you with skill even more. Then you're looking on the back end of this team and you're saying Jojo Talid and Isaac Marilis, two of the most solid all around, not just defensemen, but players in general. Guys who can both play offense if needed, who can pitch in, join the rush, contribute with their shots, both can handle the ball and can move the ball very well as defensemen. They're both mobile, but their defense doesn't go missing when they decide to chip in a little bit offensively too. You're looking at, I think, as I mentioned, these guys have all been playing together their entire lives. Every one of them has gone to Hank together. They've been there since sixth grade, if not earlier, in terms of playing hockey with each other. And they've just been incredible. And I can't say enough about what they've done on the back end to complement the skill they have up front with Elia Yitzhaki and Ilan Kogel. Isaac Marilis and Jojo Talit have both been outstanding, and they've been very slept on because of the fact you need to worry about Elia Yitzhaki and Ilan Kogel so much that people sort of forget what they have on the back end. I'm then going to go and talk about the depth players they sort of have. And at that point, it's a little bit more depth, even though they have to play on the second line. And we'll start with the contribution of Aiden Pearl. Aiden Pearl, also a senior, went to Hartora. So the one exception here who did not go to Hank and has been playing with these guys since their sixth grade year, has been a guy who I believe should have been, able to get more opportunities in, higher leverage situations in years past. It took him a little bit of time to finally get there, but now that he's there, he's been very good for Hank. He's been a huge piece of this team and what they've been able to do. He's always been a good player for his age, but because Hank decided to go with the varsity team right from his ninth grade year and only have the varsity team, he didn't always get that opportunity where a guy like Elia Yitzhaki did, for example, or a guy like Isaac Marilis did, defensively, because that's a better comparison. He plays defense. But now that he's, again, as I mentioned, now that he's on the stage, he's really made a huge impact on this Hank team. He's a lengthy guy, a bigger guy, so he boxes out very well, but he's mobile. He's got a great shot when he gets that opportunity off. His stick positioning is something that I've seen. And I know like stick positioning is not something a lot of people talk about. If you don't want to call it that, we'll talk about his reads and the way he reads the play. Very, very underrated. A lot of teams would benefit from having a defenseman like Aiden Pearl, a guy who can bring the size but has the shot, can chip in a little bit offensively. And a lot of times you see it with these bigger defensemen. They're not always that mobile or mobile as well as they could be, but he is. He's the exception to that rule. And he has been a very, very strong player for this Hank team. And I would expect him to make an impact in North Shore, a bigger gym where he's going to be able to see the floor a little bit well. That's the thing. He sees the floor so well. So that'll give him the opportunity to help, I think, be more impactful and to help make plays for this Hank team. And now we're going to talk about the two or three wild cards, I want to say, we didn't know coming into this year, but now we've seen it and we know exactly what they'll be. And those are three sophomores on this Hank team who have been very impactful for them. And it starts with Avi Hackle, who was the clear guy coming into this year to say, if anyone's going to play up in the lineup from a younger grade, it's going to be Hackle. Hackle was impactful last year as a freshman. He was the only freshman last year who started for Hank. He was incredible. He played defense. This year, he's gone back to offense. He has the ability to play both. Played offense in high school, not in high, excuse me, in middle school, and started going back and forth towards the end of his middle school career. And then in his high school years, he started last year playing defense, but could play a little bit of offense when needed. They didn't need him to because they had Ellie Schwartz and Elia Yitzhaki and Ilan Kogel going up and down the lineup as their big three. And then you take a look and you say, okay, let's move him back to offense. And he'll get the reps as a younger player. And he has exceeded the challenge. He has been a very strong player. If there's one thing I would say that, you know, really isn't what you want, it's sometimes, because he's such a physically built player, sometimes he gets over the top in terms of physicality and, there's, room with that you don't want for a penalty here and there, but it doesn't take away from everything he has done. He scored a big goal in the quarterfinal game against Frisch for Hank, and he also has, he was a very impactful player in the TABC game using his size in that smaller gym, and making it tougher on TABC defenders to make plays on him. So he is, I would say, like the 1A piece. And then there are two guys you throw in at the 1B slot, and those guys are Mo Ackerman and Isaac Silberger. And to say the least, they have been exactly what Hank has needed in terms of production from younger players, and not just juniors in this case, where it's a majority senior class. We're talking about when it's a younger than the youngest age of just a varsity level. Mo Ackerman and Isaac Silberger, a pair of 10th graders, similar, with Avi Hackle. They all played in middle school together. They all won a championship in their eighth grade year, as I mentioned. Um, But something we didn't know was how impactful they would be, especially on the varsity level. And they have not just stepped up and played big minutes, but they've stepped up, they've played big minutes, and they've done it at a very high level and in the biggest games. Starting, just for example, most recently in the playoffs, doing it against Frisch in the quarters and against TABC in the semis, they were all huge. And you want to look back to some notable games they had during the regular season as well. Of course, you could look at the two halfter games they had, including the one where they came back in overtime to clinch the 2 seed. You're going to look at when they played against SAR and against TABC, and although they lost, they were both bright spots in that game simply against teams that were just better. There was, at least at the time, because now Hank is standing here while both TABC and SAR have been eliminated from the playoffs. They were the two other semifinalist teams that did not make the championship. And when you look at it, these are two guys in Silberger and Ackerman who have both been huge. And they are playing as well as they can at the right time. They almost can't be playing any better than they already have been able to, but leave it to them now to find a way to be able to exceed the level they've been playing at already, just because people didn't think they'd bring it at the start and they started playing very well. And then their game has grown so much and they've been huge pieces for this Hank team. Now, as I mentioned, they're not a very deep team, so you're not really going to see them play more than 7 to 8, maybe 9 guys a game. If there is a ninth guy, we'll get into the action. It's another 10th grader, and that is Judah Weitzman, who is a bit on the smaller side also, but you know what? The kid's had opportunities to play on the varsity level, and although he's not in the heart and the mix of the, couple of lines Rabbi Harris plays, it's worked for him so far. And additionally, for depth scoring, that's where you're going to see the role of Weitzman play a factor if he's getting into the mix, as he was at the start of the year, but that's sort of dwindled away a little bit as the season has progressed. And then that takes us also to the goaltending in Hank's side. And boy, oh boy, it's an interesting story that I'm going to make very quick. It started with the belief that Itai Holtzman, who was a freshman last year, was going to be the starting goalie. He was great for them last year, really, with the exception of the semifinal game against TABC, where he got beat early and it snowballed. He injured himself badly enough to the point where he was going to miss this whole season, and that left the door open for senior Josh Frankel, who has always been a solid goalie and gotten reps, but Rabbi Harris, I can understand, wanting to build the class up, similar to what he's done with this year of seniors, what he's doing with the 10th graders now in Hackle, Ackerman, Weitzman, and Silberger, that you have Itai Holtzman, who was the championship winning goalie when they were eighth graders, and Hank in middle school, wanting to bring him up and see what he can do in terms of his play on the high school level. And he was great as a freshman, but he injures himself. Now you go back to Frankel, who was the starter for most of last year and even got a couple of reps in big games as a 10th grader. Didn't really get any action. If not, he just didn't get any action at all in ninth grade. But he has been a very consistent performer for Hank. And they went 9-4-0-1, so the record was strong. And you look at a couple of the games he's lost, they've been tight games. The one against SAR at the earlier stage of the year, 3-1, and the overtime loss to DRS, And then you look at some of the teams he's beaten, not just during the regular season, but especially in the playoffs. You look at the Frisch win where he only gives up one goal. You look at the win against TABC where he only gives up one goal. The game against Hafter, the first time they play, he only gives up two. So this is a guy who is really slept on. And I think that it's almost to the point where he's been criminally underrated this year for how much success Hank has had. Yes, the front runner and the guy you look at and the guys you look at on this Hank team, I should say, are obviously the names like Elia Yitzhaki, Elon Kogel, Isaac Marilis, and Jojo Talit. But then you look at what Josh Frankel's been able to give them in net, and he has been such a good, consistent goalie for them. You know, he played very well against DRS in the second game they played. And even in the first game, it was a couple of early goals, but he found a way to recompose himself and hold down the fort. It was also one of the first games of the season. There are always going to be those times when you fall in a rut a little bit early and you just can't dig yourself out right away. But he found a way. And his season has progressively got better and better and better and better. And there hasn't been any regression, really, with the exception of since maybe the third or fourth game of the year for them. So that's going to be a very big piece for them. He's going to be a very big piece for them, I should say. And it's going to make this game very, very interesting. So that really does it in terms of the matchup itself, who we're going to be looking at, what these teams have done that's led to them being here at the moment. So now we'll talk about the obvious factor, as I mentioned briefly before, which is the fact that this is a clear heavy favorite against a clear, very, very significantly worse. They're not actually Hank's not obviously not a bad team. They're in the championship, and you look at who they've beaten to get here, but the clear underdog in this story, and that's Hank. And for I would say more because a lot of people expected TABC to be here over Hank when that matchup took place. And, even for SAR to potentially have gotten there somewhere down the road, way earlier in the season before we knew who was going to be playing who, the belief, again, was that it would be, in all likeliness, TABC and DRS. They were probably the two best teams on paper coming into the year, and they were the two teams here 2 years ago when these exact teams were on the JV level and they played in the championship. And, looking at it, a lot of people thought, okay, Hank could be a solid team. They'll obviously have Elia Yitzhaki helping lead the way in goal scoring and offensive production. And, they've got Marilitz and Talid on the back end, Kogel to complement Yitzhaki and Frankel, who should be solid in net, or if it would have been Holtzman, who will definitely be solid in net. But are they good enough to make the championship? And the answer a lot of people gave at the start of the year was no. But this team believed, and a lot of people are starting to ride them now because a lot of people doubt them, including myself. I did not think they would go into TABC and beat TABC to get to the championship. Heck with it. I was having doubts about them beating Frisch. I thought they'd win in the end, but I thought the game was going to overtime when I put that prediction out. And so for them to do what they've done so far and to get here, they've more than earned their spot. And even though this is really, if you look at the names wise, yeah, it is technically still, not technically, it is still David against Goliath if you look at it, with DRS being Goliath here and Hank being David. But for all of the people who don't think that this is going to be as good a game, let me try to sell it to you like this. This is a scenario where everyone thought TABC could be here. Or not everyone, literally, but most people, the overwhelming majority of people thought TABC would be here. And now that they're not, I feel like there is this belief, at least from what I'm hearing from fans around the league and even some players around the league, that now DRS just gets to play Hank. That's a championship on a silver platter for them. Again, I don't think that's a good philosophy to have at all. I don't think Hank should be slept on here at all. They have earned their way here and they deserve to be here, and I'm not going to take that away, and no one should take that away from them. If you're DRS here, I would be saying we are practicing for this game and we are preparing for this game as if we are playing TABC. Not literally in strategy wise, Hank and TABC do different things, but it's the fair point to make. It's the championship game. You don't treat it any differently than you would have if you are playing Hank versus if you would have been playing TABC. You're better, you're tougher competition, so to speak. But Hank has earned this spot here. And for those of you saying now DRS just gets to walk all over them, you should take that back. And I'm not telling you DRS can't and won't win this game. Do I believe they're the favorites personally? Yes, I do. But you can't write Hank off. You just can't. And if you want to see an interesting story, then you should definitely tune in or get there, because you could get your opportunity to potentially see Hank pull this upset off. They've already taken out one Goliath. There is no reason they can't do it again if this Goliath is technically weaker than the one they've already beaten. Because that is the belief of a lot of people here, saying that, you know what, TABC would have been the better team over DRS here. Hank is clearly not the better team over DRS here. you can't go hopping on that bandwagon. Maybe the first part you can, but even so, you still can't to an extent because TABC is not in the championship and DRS is. But at the same time, you're looking at it and you're saying, you know what? Hank has beaten them. They might have a chance. You got to give them a chance. You can't just write them off. And that's simply the way it goes here. That is what this matchup is going to be about. It's the story of David versus Goliath, and even more so, it's not just the story of David versus Goliath with this year in general. It's also the championship game that we missed in 2021 due to COVID when there was no season at all. In 2020, we know what the championship would have been. It just never got played and teams got crowned as co-champions. This year, we get the rematch of what was the highly anticipated, the consensus belief coming into what would have been the 2020 to 2021 season. There was no athletics year at all through any school that year, neither in Jersey or in New York or Long Island, wherever. And the middle school championship was heavily predicted to be Halb, which is DRS's lower school, against Hank, which is the team we see here now, with the same characters. We have Elia Itzhaki, Jojo Talit, Elon Kogel, Isaac Marilis, Josh Frankel, or I guess at the time would have been Rami Kessock, who went to Hank. And maybe a couple of other guys, maybe Avi Hackle in the mix there as a sixth grader. Same thing with Isaac Silbiger and Mo Ackerman. The only one who would not have been there would have been Aiden Pearl. And everyone else thinking about the other side they would have faced would have been Halb, which would have featured the guys like Max Pokris and Yitzi Uden and Jack Greenbaum and Isaac Spector, Josh Papilski and net. So you're looking at it and you're saying, we didn't get that 2 years ago. And how fitting is it now? Although, yes, it might appear that better teams were potentially there as an option to get here. They didn't get here, though. So now that we're seeing this play out, it's going to answer sort of all of the questions we have from 4 years ago when we didn't see this championship game between these exact teams. Not exact, I guess. A couple players transfer in here, transfer in there. Aiden Pearl for Hank, Mika Khan for DRS. Okay, they cancel out. Do they actually? Probably not, but it depends on how you look at it. And, it's just an example of who we have in terms of the schools playing against each other. And something to know, Hank has gotten close to DRS a couple times this year and also in the last 3 years, but they have never beaten them. And this lines up with a similar story as well to when you had Hafter and DRS and Halb going at it about 10, 15 years ago. And it started with Halb and Hafter in, I want to say, the very late 2000s to very early 2010s. So right around 2007, 8 to 2013, 14. Around that time on. I apologize if I mixed up the timeline there. And you have the Hafter team that's never beaten Halberd DRS. In their senior year of high school, the same two teams, Hafter and DRS, are in the championship. And although, and we've seen this a couple times already, not necessarily just in the championship, if ever in the championship, but in other games, other playoff games and regular season games before. And Hafter's never won. And they end up with the win against DRS in the championship. It was the coach's message before. It's a video post on YouTube. You can go and check it out saying, never once have you beaten Halb and DRS. This is where you can wash away all of the nightmares over the last 7+ years. And it's the same opportunity for Hank here. They've beaten who they've needed to beat to get to this point. They've beaten Frisch. They've beaten TABC. And DRS has also gotten to this point. But Hank gets their chance now. And again, similar to JV, I'm not going to give you a prediction. I'm not going to give you a score prediction, but I'm going to tell you I think it's going to be a heck of a game and that you should not be surprised at this point, if really at all, if Hank pulls off the upset. Because I said it earlier, it's not just always about the best team during the regular season or the team with the best players, the most talent during the regular season. it is the team that, or it could be the team that is playing at their best at the right time, or the team that's the hottest at the right time. And Hank is red hot right now. They clinched the 2 seed with a big comeback win over Hafter on the road on the last day of the regular season. They get Frisch at home. They take care of business. They go into TABC, beat the fans, beat the players, everyone. They take care of business. Now they've got one more hill to climb, and I am telling you, do not write this Hank team off. It is going to be a phenomenal game, a phenomenal finish, and a very fitting end for the end of the 2024-2025 varsity hockey season. So that is everything that we have going into this championship doubleheader, both JV and varsity. It's going to be absolutely incredible. So again, just to remind you guys, JV is DRS against TABC at 11:45. That's going to be at after. You can catch the broadcast there. It should be posted on the league website. If you just go to the championship matchup in the playoff bracket, there should be a link there. If you can't find it, just you could probably search it up on YouTube or the internet. It should come up. I'll be on the call with Jacob Schwartzman for that one. And then in varsity, the game will be at North Shore. It's going to start at about 6 o'clock in the evening. I was going to say afternoon, but it's the evening at that point. And I will be on the call with Elliot Weiselberg, who will be joining me, or really, I'll be joining him. It's his baby, as he said, and respectfully so, he is the best when it comes to this in terms of putting this stuff together on the broadcast. So shout out to you, Elliot, who was supposed to be here with me doing this episode but couldn't, and looking forward to doing the broadcast with him. And there's a chance Jacob Schwartzman will be joining us for that one as well. That one also, just go to the league website, check it out. It should be there. If you don't find a link, you could search up MYHSAL Championship, and you should be able to find it on YouTube on a live broadcast. It's going to be incredible. Can't wait. I'm sure you all can't wait. And I'm also sure you guys want to hear who our sponsor is. Again, to remind everyone, we are sponsored by the Weiselberg Law Firm. Please choose wisely. Everyone, looking forward to a fantastic set of a doubleheader in this championship Sunday coming up. And hopefully it'll be 2 great games. May the best team win.